Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. The global theme for this year's 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, which we all know runs from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, is Unite to Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. Now, having said that, it's very important to sit back and then analyze that in a society like ours, where perhaps patriarchy, where perhaps misogyny is so deep-rooted, and also where in its own course, challenging the typical gender stereotypes comes with its own baggage. How easy or difficult is it to then implement the same? This is something upon which we'll be shedding light during the course of today's conversation. Overall, we'll not only be talking about generally violence against women as it does exist in the Pakistani society, we'll also be talking about the various laws and policies which have been passed to combat the same. How effective have they actually been? We'll also be talking in this regard with regards to, the society's generic attitude towards the same too, and why is it so important not only to educate but also to sensitize masses, more particularly men in this regard too. We'll also be delving upon the fact that we do see that the government has set up violence against women centers. What has been the effectiveness of the same, and how can we as a society work towards generally combating violence as a social evil? All of this today, that too with an extremely eminent panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Madam Musarrat Misbah Saiba, who is a social activist and she's also an entrepreneur. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, madam.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're most welcome. My second panelist for today's show is Ms. Hafsa Mazhar, who is a GBV, that's a gender-based violence expert. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam, and thank you so much for inviting us today.
Thank you for joining us. And via telephone line, we'll be joined by Ms. Rabia Usman, who is a District Women Protection Officer from the Social Welfare Department, Punjab. Assalamu alaikum, madam, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Fatma.
Now, before we start the discussion on today's show, let's have a look at this brief report and we'll keep the conversation going on from there.
Gender-based violence in Pakistan, in particular violence against women, is still a major societal problem. Women in Pakistan mainly encounter violence by being forced into marriage, rape, workplace harassment, domestic violence and honor killings. There has also been an uptick of violence against transgenders during the recent years. According to the United Nations Fund for Population Activities, at least 32% of women in Pakistan have faced some form of gender-based violence. According to the World Bank, about 2 million more girls than boys are out of school in Pakistan. The lack of education directly reinforces a cycle of inequality which prevents women from participating in societal institutions such as the workforce, education and politics. While the government of Pakistan has passed various laws to prevent violence and support those affected by it, the conviction rate for violence against women sits at only 1 to 2.5%. To combat this serious issue, strengthening legal and governmental institutions is needed. Legal framework must be bolstered to ensure swift and impartial justice for victims of gender-based violence.
Women have to face most of the gender-based violence in this society and also globally, because the global statistics tell that 1 out of 3 women have faced or are expected to face violence at the hands of an intimate partner at any step of their lives. So these numbers are very alarming. And since violence has been done in very institutionalized ways in the history, but it is still done in diverse ways, like there is honor killing, there is acid throwing, there are other hate crimes against women. So the first step is to spread awareness against this violence and to admit that violence is a reality. It is a reality of every household. Domestic violence is very real. And then the magnitude is so big that the governmental intervention is very much required. We know that there are many laws to address the issue, but there are gaps of implementation.
To highlight the need to combat gender-based violence on an international level, the Global 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign takes place, which calls for an end to violence against women and girls. It runs from 25th November, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, till 10th December, Human Rights Day. In support of this campaign, the United Nations Secretary General's Unite by 2030 initiative calls for global action to increase awareness, galvanize advocacy efforts, and share knowledge and innovations to help end all types of violence against women and girls. This year's theme is Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. The campaign calls on citizens to show how much they care about ending violence against women and girls by sharing the actions they are taking to create a world free from violence towards women. This year's campaign also calls on governments worldwide to share how they are investing in gender-based violence prevention.
Welcome back. Now to start the conversation on today's show. Madam, I would like to start the show with you. To quote the statistics, we understand the fact nearly 1 in every 3 women has been abused or subjected to violence at least once in her lifetime. And we also understand the fact that during war and conflicts, even during pandemics like the COVID-19, we saw that these figures were rising. So as somebody who has had such a vast experience, not only working with such violence survivors, but actually rehabilitating and treating them too, what are the basic root causes of the same?
Violence is not just the physical, problems that they face, but mentally also, harassment also. So I think all the women in our society are subjected to some kind of violence. Now, my focus is actually on the worst kind of violence, and that is acid throwing. Acid or burning them with kerosene oil. The root causes for that, unbelievable. I mean, a woman is thrown acid because she refuses to marry somebody that she doesn't want to, or maybe is being asked to marry somebody who's maybe 40 years older than her, or somebody who's not brought ample dowry, or a woman who's given birth to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 females.
Right.
So, and then of course, it comes to some legal problems also.
Of course, for reasons beyond our control
also,
of course.
Inheritance also. So, why do they do that?
Because you see, it's a very power dynamic motivated crime.
Exactly.
It comes to the power imbalance that unfortunately still exists in the Pakistani society, because of which men feel that they in one way or the other they are superior on women, and that is their way of showing their superiority over them.
Bilkul, that's very true. But the fact remains the same, that the number is rising. These women are subjected to this kind of violence. It is actually premeditated crime, which means that that person has actually that person wants to kill that woman, or to bring her to the point where she cannot live normally.
And like you rightly so mentioned, the worst form of violence, because you see, with regards to the other violence, be it economic abuse, be it for that matter harassment of any sort, be it domestic violence, there is some way or the other that you get out of it. But throwing acid on somebody is completely destroying or marring their identity for a lifetime.
Exactly.
Madam.
I mean, for a woman, it is very important that she has a face. Now, when a woman has no face, she will have no voice. When she doesn't have a voice, she won't be able to concern the voice that would actually help her in coming out of that trauma.
Right, basically.
Because she doesn't have anything left to say. She'd rather die. They're very suicidal. They go through such atrocities and such difficult times in their lives that they would rather die,
We'll talk about this, but before that, I would want you to join the conversation too. So, when we do talk about violence, one thing that we generally understand, whether it is violence in the form of economic abuse, whether it is violence, or even for that matter, ASIC-induced violence, one thing that we generally see in the Pakistani society is the fact that we unfortunately still normalize it. We feel that yes, if this has happened, then perhaps this is something to do with the woman herself. More often than not, the blame is put on the victim as opposed to punishing the aggressor.
Yes.
We often hear people saying this happened to her because she didn't conduct herself in the most appropriate manner. So with things like these, with societal attitudes like these, how do you feel as a women rights activist in your own right, can we actually overcome the same? Because you see, the laws, they are there is no denying to that, but it is the societal attitudes like these which actually pose a threat to the successful implementation of such laws.
Thank you, Fatma, and you
You're most
rightly
welcome.
said that this is a patriarchal society, and in a patriarchal society the power plays its role. we call it a negative masculinities. We built and brought up our children with the notion, especially we try to make the men so powerful, and we are giving them so much power from the different sources. We are economically empowering them, we are making them strong to make a decision maker in the society, especially at home. So these powers are utilized on a very negative way. So when it comes to the women always seen at a very subordinate position. So this notion actually creating a problem. So that is making violence so normalized. And we are also, you know, building a culture where the people like to bear it, and they don't want to raise the voice against it.
That's very rightly put by yourself. Let's see what Ms. Rabia has to say. Which I'll come to you, Ms. Rabia, and here we must talk about your work in this regard too. Now, we understand that you are the District Women Protection Officer, that too working for the Department of Social Welfare in Punjab. In the capacity of the same, could you please tell us that when it comes to your work, what responsibility does your center have so as to ensure that women who do complain being subjected to violence, they get timely redressal?
Thank you so much, Fatma, for making me a part of this discussion. Before going towards the details, I would quickly introduce the services of the Women Protection Centres, or the Violence Against Women Centres. The Punjab Protection of Women Against Violence Act 2016 has been notified all across Punjab since December 2022, and the names of service delivery institutions like the crisis centres, the Women Protection Centres and Violence Against Women Centres are being used synonymously, as the said Act brought domestic violence into the criminal justice system, and all these centres are providing services under that Act. So the Women Protection Centres are safe spaces for women to report all types of violence. The service providers are all women too, and the survivors feel comfortable in sharing their experiences. There is no eligibility criteria, and the centres are completely walk-in and provide free of cost services by the state, which include referral to the law enforcement agencies, mediation, legal advice, legal aid, referral to safe shelters and to other organizations for economic empowerment. The most important point is that the services are survivor-centric, and without the consent of the woman, no action is taken. Although it is the job of the service provider to give her a complete picture of all the options she can avail, but in the end, it's her decision as in how she wants things to be.
That's very right, madam, because whenever we do talk about the right to actually avail such services, it should ideally in any situation be very survivor-centric. But when we talk about this entire issue in the context of the 16 days of activism, how particularly do you or your center for that matter encourage women to come forward and put forward, you know, their complaints in this regard? Because violence, as we do all know, does come with its own stigma. A lot of times women might not be that comfortable talking about the same just because they fear that they might be victim blamed or they might be victim shamed.
Talking about statistics, we must keep in mind that violence against women is, especially domestic violence, it is severely underreported. Our cultural practices and the societal fabric has conditioned the families, that includes both men and women, to not report domestic violence to the authorities. Women do confide in their family members, to their sisters or mother or their cousins or friends, but when it comes to reporting to the authorities, they don't have the courage to do so, they are afraid to do so, they are not conditioned to do so, they are scared of the consequences. It's a cultural taboo, it's a social taboo. So we take these 16 days as an opportunity to raise awareness about redressal mechanisms which are being provided by the government, so that the survivors, they get encouraged to report and they stop suffering in silence.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, madam. You just heard what Ms. Rabia had to say. What is the scope of the services and how are they working to provide proper redressal to women who complain of being subjected to violence? Now the question then is that you are from the private sector, she is working for the government. We do see that there is a common interest on part of both the state as well as the private sector to protect such women. Why can we not have collaborative efforts in this regard? To some extent, the government is working in this regard, we do understand, because they do refer cases to other civil society organizations too. But do you not feel this is something which needs to be perhaps prioritized more?
Yes, it should be, because I have more than 856 or 57 girls, women, children and even boys also who are subjected to this crime. Now, their complaint would always come after the first part, which is providing them the first aid and taking them to the nearest good hospital facility. Then comes the part when the complaints has to be lodged. If it is a compound crime, where they know that whoever has thrown acid is that certain person,
Right.
the police is always there. This is a medico-legal cases. But at that very moment, for the family, it is more important to make her live, to give her the bestest of the treatment, so that she can then fight. Now that's the point where the law enforcement agencies have to be
extremely quick in their response, very quick.
And quick and understanding also. Like you said in your intro also, or maybe asking question, that they always blame it on the woman. They must have done something to deserve.
I will agree with you on that. In this regard, we also need perhaps more female representation in the law enforcement as well. A lot of times, women wouldn't want to go and report such cases because they just don't feel comfortable doing so.
Not comfortable because maybe they've been raped and then thrown acid. I have cases like this. Who would like to go and say, "Ji, this has happened."
Right.
So there, we need a team of law enforcing agencies,
healthcare
professionals, and of course, from the government sector, these centers, they should be there.
In all, then there needs to be effective coordination amongst the various stakeholders. Right, madam. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Rabia, and here we must also talk about the various cultural nuances which perhaps might surround your work too, because in ways more than one, we do see that people who are actually working on issues like these, they might be threatened, they might be stigmatized, there might be other issues too. So in this regard, could you please share your experiences too?
Our societal practices, this patriarchal mindset, these are huge challenges for us as service providers to ensure sustainable intervention of law in a household which is suffering from silence, as the mindsets of both men and women, I must say both men and women, are very patriarchal and resistant to change. I think massive awareness campaigns at all mediums, whether it's electronic media, print media, the social media, or the dramas, or whichever medium the public use, that needs to be taken on board for raising awareness. I would say poverty, financial dependence of women on men, cultural practices, patriarchy, and toxic masculinity. These are the key factors yielding into violence against women. Although poverty is a major factor, but not the only factor, we know that violence against women and girls happens across the board, whether the household is rich or poor. The Federal Shariat Court has given a very comprehensive landmark judgment which has upheld Punjab Protection of Women Against Violence Act and declared it completely aligned with the teachings of Islam. It clearly states that there is no space for violence in a household and has elaborated the hadiths and Quranic verses which strengthen the sanctity of the institution of family.
Ms. Rabia, because when we do talk about this social evil, it's very important then to tackle this from ways more than one, be it from the education viewpoint, be it from the media viewpoint, or be it from that matter from the law enforcement viewpoint. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Hafza, and here we must talk about the role of social media in this regard too, and building on from where Ms. Rabia left. Here it's very important then to also understand the fact that when we do talk about the increasing use of technology, the increasing use of internet, and of course social media, we understand that at one end social media has that power to educate people about not one, rather various social causes. But when it comes to issues like violence against women, how do you see social media doing the same, that too in a way which doesn't in any way glorify the plight of people who have been subjected to violence?
We need to allocate some of the time, especially on the mainstream media, to educate people on these critical issues. But as well as we also need to educate our youth to utilize social media on a very responsible way. At the moment, the youth utilizing social media on a very negative things. I must say that we are not utilizing it very responsibly to educate people, to raise the voices, to make the victims more vulnerable. So this is negative things what we are doing at the moment. So we need to reverse it completely.
Right. You wanted to add something to yes, please.
That right now how I see it, that people are more interested in making a sensational and a breaking news, you know, may it be a small WhatsApp clip or you know, Twitter or whatever they are using. I mean, we see that they are actually recording things happening, violence happening. Why they do keep recording it? Why can't they stop it?
Right,
you
basically.
know, so that's where you say that it's actually becoming.
With regards to TV, madam, you cannot even disclose the identity of a victim who's been subjected to violence without their due consent. It appears people are not very aware of the same. But here, then again, madam, your perspective becomes very important. When we do talk about media awareness, we also understand that the electronic media, it has a very important role to play, and television dramas too. So you see, the narrative, it needs to change. Rather than portraying such women as mere victims, why can we not portray them as heroes of their own stories?
Exactly, because see, the life doesn't end after a certain number of procedures, operations. When their eyes have opened up and they can see, or their limbs which were contracted can now start working. This is the time when the media should play its role.
Exactly.
Yes, it was a breaking news, but I've never ever seen any you know, channel picking up from that point onwards that girl,
how is her life there onwards?
How is her life now?
True, that's so
Fine,
true.
we understand that there are dramas which are actually voicing, you know, and picking up issues like violence and all. But then, why does it have to be all the time a miserable condition? You know,
you can change the narrative by projecting them to be strong women who've come out of something and they are survivors. They're living their lives happily thereafter. But in this regard, then we also see people like yourself making your mark. You've been working for acid attack survivors for, I think, 2 decades now. 2000 and more than that. I was reading that in an interview of yours. So when it comes to highlighting both the highs as well as the lows of your journey, how would you evaluate the same? Like 20 years or more down the lane, when you look back and you see, what do you feel have been your biggest achievements with regards to bringing such women into the mainstream?
In our society, women who are subjected to such kind of atrocity, the life doesn't end for them. My biggest achievement is that these women are empowered, but not all of them, but some of them who actually become the hero for the other victims,
right,
or survivors for that matter. Like 36 girls have been married into normal family, you know, lives. Normal boys who have married them. I mean, salute to those boys.
Of course.
You know, who've accepted them with all their deformities and, you know, the faces and the body.
As they are with their imperfections.
Exactly. And then these women, they stand up.
And also, madam, it's very important to clarify that you've also been looking out for men who have been victims of acid attacks. It's just not something which is specifically geared towards women, because anybody can be subjected to this brutal form of violence.
And it's not just, and it's, you know, my project is not just for the women, the children or girls. No difference between the caste, creed or religion. I mean, we have got women who've been burnt in maybe Shorecourt or you know, in the interior Sindh area, or you know, KPK or south of Punjab. These women actually, once they get this strength and accept that this is something which has happened, we have got younger children or girls, we have to take care of them. So, and the same goes for the men also. You know, this young man was actually, he was drenched in acid.
So sad.
An educated boy, lost both his eyes, and now, you know, he runs his own YouTube.
I have had that opportunity of seeing him on YouTube as well, on which I'll come to you, Ms. Hafsa, and we must talk about cyber violence in this regard too, something which is extremely relevant for today's debate. So when we do talk about violence being committed against women in online spaces, that too against marginalized groups, people with perhaps different disabilities, how do you see the trends? Because there is definitely a trend which suggests that women who might be differently abled, they might be more open or more vulnerable that way so as to be subjected to online violence.
The report recently published day before yesterday, it is highlighting that the cyber harassment is increasing day by day. The reason is that the youth, especially utilizing social media, as I'm saying, they are not utilizing it very carefully. Why? Because every social media channel has some settings where the people can make their identities safe, and they can make their pictures and other materials they wanted to post on the social media to make it non-copyable or non-publicable. But the people are not aware on that, especially the young girls. They are utilizing social media, the Twitter, Facebook and other all social media
and this
channels.
is also not only with reference to women who are actually using social media. Sometimes you also see that if somebody is subjected to violence in real life, this is something which might then extend to online spaces too. And then we also see on Facebook, more often than not, we've seen Facebook groups where women who've come in support of such survivors, they have also been subjected to harassment. So it's a vicious cycle, one after the other. And then you must be remembering this case of the female journalist. In ways more than one, they have been harassed in online spaces too.
Right. Yeah.
On which I'll come to you, Ms. Rabia. Another question that I would want to put to you is with regards to increasing cases of rape and sexual violence in the Pakistani society. Now, we all understand the fact that this particular form of violence is something which is extremely stigmatized, more so when it is reported. But then again, you see this is a vicious cycle. If somebody doesn't come forward and report this very crime, how can we then in turn put the perpetrators to task? So what is it that the Women Protection Center is actually doing so as to encourage reporting of such cases?
Unfortunately, so far we have seen less of the success stories and faced more of the challenges when it comes to cases of sexual violence and rape. First of all, such cases are largely unreported. Families deal with it quietly due to various reasons. They are scared of the social stigma, they are discouraged by the system, they are already traumatized and they don't have the energy and resources to pursue the case. Plus, the culture of victim blaming has become natural to the fabric of our society, and it is a huge discouraging factor which makes the women suffer in silence. Similarly, women and girls avoid reporting due to the fear of retaliation or life threat or blackmailing. The backlash they have to face from the society is sometimes a bigger trauma than the trauma they have already endured. We as service providers receive threats and face pressure from influential families to get things done their way. Sometimes it is very subtle and firm, and we get a constant message to counsel the survivor. Obviously, it doesn't actually mean mere counseling. We have to take a stand for our survivors and repeatedly clarify that counseling does not mean forced reconciliation. The good thing is that the government is actively working for the implementation of Anti-Rape Trial and Investigation Act 2021, and a very holistic service delivery system is being set up, which includes anti-rape crisis cells in hospitals and special courts for a sensitized and speedy trial. Also, there is a law that focuses on keeping the identity of the victim confidential at all forums, especially in reporting on media. So I think we should make the public aware of all the laws and the work being done, and the society should play its part in encouraging reporting of such cases.
Right, madam. But then if we are serious as a society to combat such crimes, then it is very important that we not only strengthen the law enforcement in this regard, but we also sensitize them about the very nature of such crimes, on which I'll come to you. Here we must talk about your experience of working on women's health, on their reproductive health, so to speak, and how we can actually use these 16 days of activism so as to promote women's health too, because that, as we all understand, is also our fundamental right. It does come within the corners of women's dignity, her autonomy, her own body. So when it comes to advocating for women's health, that too from the perspective of ensuring that she does get this fundamental right, what all has Pakistan done and what more does it need to do?
Reproductive health rights of women and the men both are very important, and the women has a very important role, not only to give birth of a children but take care of their upbringing and everything, but other than that, the women as an human being, she has a right to take care for herself as well. So this is really important to link it with their health, and GBV is also a very critical issue which is disturbing and destroying the women's health on a very different level. So this is really important. The Pakistan has made a commitment for family planning as well, for reproductive health rights and educating people on a media, social media and other all platforms. MNCH issue is also associated with that. We appreciate government here that the basic health unit has been re-established, and they are trying to improve the access to the health services for women, but there are a lot more work need to do.
Right. Madam, moving on, another question that I would want to put to you is about dowry abuse and of course dowry related violence, which we all understand is on a rampant rise in Pakistan. Now, reports suggest the fact that almost 2,000 cases have been reported per year, that too of dowry deaths. Considering of course the fact that Islam doesn't in any way encourage this very practice, and of course giving due consideration to the fact that when it comes to our laws, we do see that dowry is something which has been either fully or partially banned by the laws too, because we do understand that this subject is something which has been devolved onto the provinces post the 18th Amendment. Why then do you feel this is something which still exists in the Pakistani society?
The upper segment of our society, they have to show off. And when they show off, it is a trickle down effect. The middle classes then say, well, if we can't, do that much, at least we can try to do a little bit better than the people from the humble background. Now, when it comes down to the humble background, there, they are actually in a fix, because those are the people who are most and worst affected. Because dowry, in a way, is actually giving away the girl and making sure that this girl then doesn't come back again. So give her as much as possible, which of course it is at times very difficult for the families to actually cover up the demands which come from
exactly.
From the groom side. There are places in Pakistan where men give dowry.
Right. But coming to you here, we must talk about this from the legal perspective too, because we do understand that Pakistan, at least on paper, does have very progressive laws and policies when it comes to combating different forms of violence, be it harassment, be it cyber harassment, be it domestic violence, be it even for that matter acid attacks. But why do we not see them being implemented in practice? Because there again we do see a gap.
Yeah, Fatma, one thing is awareness, and lack of awareness is the major problem. The people don't know about their rights, and even the laws are available, but it is the responsibility still lies on the government to educate people, to advertise it on a newspaper and make it more common for people. Everybody know that this is my right and there is a law, I can report that.
Madam, on which I'll come to you, and here we must talk about this entire issue of violence against women from the viewpoint of depriving women from their basic property rights, from depriving them from their due inheritance shares too, because a lot of times we see that women in Pakistan, more particularly in the rural and remote areas, they might be subjected to violence because of such reasons. So when it comes to cases like these, how is a Women Protection Center working to cater to them? And in the course of doing so, what kind of interventions are there so as to manage very emergency related, very crisis related scenarios?
The Women Protection Centers provide services for all types of violence, whether it's harassment at workplace, inheritance of property issue, cybercrime, or any type of domestic violence. The centers have strong linkages with the police, the FIA, and an effective connection with the ombudspersons for harassment at workplace and inheritance of property cases. The most important thing is the completely free of cost legal aid service, which helps the survivors in seeking relief from the courts of law. We have expert lawyers in our panel of volunteer lawyers who are representatives of well-reputed women welfare organizations and hold expertise in cybercrime and other violence against women cases. Safety planning and crisis management are our primary interventions when the survivor reaches us. We prefer relocating her to a safe space, with her consent of course, before initiating proceedings. In the awareness and outreach sessions at the community, we highlight the importance of keeping necessary documentation like the Nikahnama, the property papers and the CNIC. We always tell women and girls to report life-threatening violent situations on 15 helpline, as it is the only emergency response service which can reach in a short time and mitigate the danger.
And that's very right, and we also do have safety apps in this regard to which people can very easily download and very easily report such cases to. Madam, coming towards you and moving towards the end of the show, so what would be your takeaway message not only to women who have been survivors of violence but also to their family members when it comes to ensuring their successful rehabilitation or social reintegration in the society?
We are very lucky. There are all kinds of laws. Unfortunately, not implemented. So we have to work on the implementation of the laws. Like, you know, our esteemed guest said that, you know, there are laws for inheritance, for violence, for harassment,
acid attacks.
Yeah, so acid attacks or cybercrime and all. People need to know. So we have to educate our people, number one. Number two, the families also need to be educated so that if, for, you know, God forbid, if something like something which really happens, which is really bad for them, you know, the sense of bad, it could be, you know, a girl who's been maybe, you know, on her way back from the school or college, been pinched by a boy, or a woman who's been thrown acid because she has refused, or maybe the dowry, or maybe the inheritance. The family needs to know about the laws, number one, and how and where to go.
Right.
You
What
know,
is the right forum to report to?
To report to. And who tells them that? Media.
Media.
So
right.
media has to play a very, very important and positive role to combat all these women, you know, related issues.
Right, madam, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you. And before we conclude today's show, keeping in mind the very theme of this year's 16 Days of Activism, which very categorically states to invest to prevent violence against women and girls, how particularly do you feel can that be done? Both in terms of perhaps changing our substantive policies, and number two, perhaps in reforming our institutions.
Number one, Fatma, I would like to encourage government institutions to invest on implementation of the laws, first of all. Increase the education, educate people, use social media, use mainstream media and the channels, other channels available. Then they can build the public-private partnerships, and they can also invite CSOs, community service organizations, to come together to work on the awareness raising issue. Secondly, I would encourage the government should invest on the youth. If the 60% youth in Pakistan, you know, and half of them are in the universities and schools and colleges, so these are the platform we need to utilize and need to transform all the youth into change agents. That we can invest, and that investment can, you know, bring a lot more benefits in future as well.
And also, when we do talk about improving our policies, one thing that I would want to add to what you already said is also to work on data collection in this way, because we need to have accurate data which is very accurately then reflected in our policies too, be it those relating to, you know, acid attacks, be it those relating to harassment, be it those relating to cyber violence, because you see, everything has to come from the field. It has to be an accurate reflection of whatever is happening in the society, so as to be able to properly and in an informed manner combat the same too. Madam, coming towards you and to conclude today's show, my last question to you would then be that how can we as a society work towards strengthening our local and global collaboration so as to ensure that we do away with gender-based violence, not only when it arises, but we actively also work towards preventing it. And this is something which has been very categorically emphasized in the 2023's 16 Days of Activism theme too.
I think effective collaborations are already in place at both the local and global levels. For example, at the local level, all the women in protection centers, they are closely linked with other government departments and relevant civil society organizations. The district women protection committees, which were formed under the Act, have official and non-official members. Police, health, prosecution department, local government department, social welfare department, they are all together, they are all on board, and they are part of the district women protection committees. And I think this devises a very good collaborative and implementation system. In terms of international support and collaborations, INGOs like JICA, UN Women, UNFPA, UNICEF and many others, they are all assisting the government in implementation of pro-women legislation and in reaching the objectives of CEDAW, which Pakistan has ratified.
That's very rightly put by yourself, madam. And in addition to that, of course, other treaties like the CRC in this regard too. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, madam. Thank you so much, Ms. Hafsa. And thank you so much, Ms. Rabia.
Thank you so much, Fatma.
Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the 16 days of activism. We also spoke about its very theme in the year 2023. We spoke about how we have seen different forms of violence exist in the Pakistani society and what laws and policies have actually been enacted to combat the same. If we want to implement such laws and policies, then what is very important is that we actually educate people about the importance of the same. We need to, as a society, generally understand the fact that whenever we talk about gender equality, this is something which will not only help us, doing away with poverty in the society, but definitely this is something which will help us advocate for greater sustainable development and overall better governance in the country too. Thank you for watching The Society. Until next time, take care. Allah Hafiz.